welcome to the 300 After Hours. We continue to have a little bit of dialogue and discussion about what we were talking about at our weekly young adult Bible study. And tonight we have Garrett here. Thank you for being here with me and with us and talking about this text a little bit. We're still in Galatians chapter 1, and we covered verses 13 and 14 tonight. Garrett, let me just read through those verses really quickly here, and then we'll just get your thoughts on what you guys talked about. Good. Paul says, beginning in verse 13 there, he says, "For you have heard of my former life in Judaism, how I persecuted the church of God violently and tried to destroy it. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people. So extremely zealous was I for the traditions of my fathers." And what we pointed out tonight, Garrett, was that Paul is beginning a section when he's going to give his testimony. Through about 12 verses here, he's going to give his testimony. This is just the very first part of his testimony. Yeah. Why is he giving his testimony in Galatians here?
Yeah, so this is a point where Paul is addressing the church of Galatia. And I think kind of one of the big contrasts that has to be made is the character of Paul before his conversion to Christianity and then his new character in Christ afterwards. So it's kind of establishing his role as an apostle, but also one that has authority and good teaching over the church, not merely the person who he used to be in the persecution of the church. Yeah.
So his testimony is going to validate who he is. It's going to validate that he is an ambassador, an authentic ambassador of Jesus Christ. And then that will, in turn, validate the message that he brought, right?
Absolutely.
As not being from men, which he's already stated thus far. Okay, so that's good. And again, this is just the very first part of the testimony. This is the part of the testimony that we would say is his pre-conversion part of the testimony, right? Yeah. And do you remember what we said about like those different parts of a testimony that would make a testimony like powerful?
Yeah, so we discussed a little bit about the pre-conversion versus the post-conversion part, and then just addressing the stark difference between the two. And the pre-conversion is usually something that is desperate, maybe hopeless without Christ, something that is bearing bad fruit. In this case, Paul is very zealous, not exhibiting the character of Christ. And then the post-conversion bears new good fruit within Christ.
Okay, so there's got to be a pre-conversion part, right? Or, I mean, for this type of if it's a conversion testimony, a time like who you were before Christ. Paul says he was engaged in a pursuit that was anti-God or against the church of God, that you would say, well, this is who I was before. Then there's a post-conversion part. This is who I am now. There should be a difference between those two, right? Or you don't have much of a testimony, so there should be a difference. Yeah. But then we also explain the difference, right? And as Christians, that the difference would be Christ, right? Yeah. And so transformation, we talked about transformation being a key part of a powerful testimony, right?
Yeah.
Now, beyond this kind of testimony, which is like a testimony of his conversion, does the Christian have a testimony that is not like a conversion testimony, like outside of just his conversion testimony, just like the general testimony of a Christian's life? You guys talk about that at all?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is addressing exactly that, but for some people who grew up in the church and who knew Christ their entire life, they might not have that pinpoint moment where they were converted or heard the gospel for the first time or were baptized or something like that. But we talked a little bit about the nature of growth and the many ways that can take form. You know, one way is like, through your journey, you'll have ebbs and flows. You'll have your ups and downs, and sometimes you'll feel really hopeless, but you still stand resolute and look back on who you were previously. I think you shared a little bit about one experience where you were able to look back and say, wow, 10 years ago, I was, nowhere near the point I am now in Christ. And you have better fruit continually coming forward in your life. And even though you might not always see it in the moment, you'll see a gradual increase in that way. And that could be a powerful testimony to others.
Yeah. I like the word, like when you use that word growth, right? That seems to be a key word. I mean, I love using that word as well because things that are alive grow.
Yeah.
And at different rates. You know, and for us as Christians who are being conformed in the image of Christ, it's never at a fast enough rate for us. Yeah. But there's growth there, and things that are alive grow. Jesus says, "Apart from me, you can do nothing." He's saying, "But with me, if the branch is attached to the vine, there's going to be fruit." And like you said, it's not something you see. We have the ebbs and flows of our life. You maybe don't see that growth in a day, or day upon day, or even week upon week. But maybe you could look back and go, "Wow, I'm not who I should be. I'm not who I will be in the end." But thank God, I'm not exactly who I was. There's been some advancement in my life, right? Some fruit.
Yeah.
And that is a wonderful testimony. I mean, that is the testimony of the Christian, isn't it? That even after our conversion, the testimony of me as a converted person today and me as a converted follower of Christ in 10 years, it should be a testimony of transformation, right?
Yeah.
And we should be conformed to the image of Christ.
Absolutely. And always seeking to be.
Yeah. What else you guys talk about?
We talked a little bit just about our individual testimonies and how that takes shape. We talked a little bit about feeling discouraged and being able to bring yourself back to a place where you can find courage, and just knowing that, standing resolute in the gospel and knowing that once you are a believer in Christ, your salvation is certain. It's a really good hope that that fruit will be born into your life, and that you will continue to see that sanctification gradually throughout your life. And it's just really inspiring to know that in the valleys. Yeah. And to remember that.
Yeah. It seems like, even if I think about, Paul in 2 Corinthians talking about how he's like an earthen vessel, a fragile jar, but inside he has this treasure, and because of that, he can be pressed on all sides and not broken. He can be perplexed, but not driven to despair. Oftentimes our testimony is we are in that perplexing time, or a time when we are pressed on all sides. And the testimony is that something that would otherwise break us or would otherwise drive us to despair doesn't, right? And so it doesn't look like this tremendous advancement in our faith, but it's you are being something that you wouldn't otherwise be were it not for Christ being there, right? Yeah. And so that's a wonderful testimony as well. So let me ask you, Garrett, did you at the table, did it seem like people were able to vocalize or talk about their testimony? And is that important for us to be able to do that? What do you think?
Yeah, so I was actually pretty surprised. People were very ready to give their testimony. And even with myself, like I didn't think I would really have much of a testimony to dig into initially, but after we started getting the ball rolling, we were able to really dig in, and it was actually powerful. It was very powerful. I'd say that's a great tool that we can use as believers to evangelize, but also just to connect with other believers about topics like this. Yeah.
Amen. I agree. Need to be able, as Peter says, be able to give an answer for the hope that lies within us to those who ask. So if we're living a transformed life, people will ask about like what's going on inside of us, and we have to be able to answer that. So, all right, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you, Garrett, for joining me here, and thank you all for joining us. And we'll see you next week at the same time. God bless.